Welcome the anointed ones. When the light of truth stares back at you, even the bravest intellect begins to blink. They thought they could study you, that if they put you under enough fluorescent light, hooked you to enough machines, or ran enough psychological tests, they could explain away the mystery that lives behind your eyes. But here's the cosmic joke. The more they tried to analyze your gaze, the more their reality began to glitch. Facts stopped adding up. Equipment malfunctioned. Even the experts started questioning whether you were reading them instead. And maybe you were. Scientists say that human eyes can detect a single photon, the smallest measurable unit of light. But what they don't tell you is that some souls can detect truth in the same way, even when it hides behind charm, lies, or expensive degrees. You didn't just see people, you saw through them. And that terrified the ones who've made a career out of hiding behind masks. They brought in body language experts, spiritual analysts, even people who claimed to read energy fields. They wanted to understand how one glance from you could make grown adults lose their composure, change their story mid-sentence, or suddenly remember things they thought they'd buried. But instead of decoding you, they began to unravel themselves. Because looking into the eyes of someone spiritually awake is like opening a browser tab to heaven while your soul's antivirus is out of date. They called it research. You called it revelation. Welcome to the truth they couldn't quantify, the moment they realized your gaze wasn't curiosity, it was correction. They studied your eyes, but your energy studied them back. And that's when their entire sense of control began to fall apart. Number 1, your gaze was never observation. It was activation. They thought your gaze was just a glance, a passing look, a normal human response. But every time you looked at them, something inside them shifted, like a lock clicking open somewhere deep in their subconscious. You weren't observing, you were activating. Your eyes weren't windows, they were switches, triggering buried memories, unresolved guilt, unspoken truths. They tried to study you like an object of curiosity, not realizing that what your eyes did wasn't psychological, it was spiritual. When your gaze met theirs, the walls they built to protect their illusions began to tremble. You didn't say a word, yet they felt confronted by every lie they'd told themselves. You carry a rare kind of awareness, the kind that doesn't need proof or evidence because it already knows. When you look at someone, it's like your energy sends out a quiet signal that scans through layers of pretense, defense, and disguise. People who live dishonestly feel exposed around you without understanding why. It's not intimidation, it's involuntary awakening. You bring light into the hidden corners of their conscience, and light always reveals what darkness works hard to hide. That's why they can't maintain eye contact for long. They sense something sacred, a kind of intelligence that doesn't come from studying books, but from being connected to a higher current of truth. They hired experts thinking they could decode what you were doing. They thought it was charisma, micro-expressions, or subtle psychological tactics. But none of that explained how your gaze left people speechless, nervous, or suddenly emotional. It wasn't charm, it was resonance. Your energy field was tuning theirs to a higher frequency, and that process felt like exposure. What they didn't know is that the human body reacts to truth. Heartbeats change, pupils dilate, temperature shifts. You were never manipulating them. You were simply vibrating at a level where deception can't breathe. Your gaze became a mirror that reflected their hidden selves back to them, and not everyone can handle what they see. For some, it was healing. For others, it was terrifying. Because when someone meets the kind of awareness you carry, they either rise or retreat. You didn't need to prove your power, you just had to look, and everything false began to fall apart. Number 2, Their science collided with divinity. They brought in people with degrees, devices, and data charts, convinced that science could decode what they were witnessing in you. They thought your energy could be measured like temperature or pulse. But the moment they tried to confine something divine to human instruments, their logic began to short-circuit. They were analyzing something that didn't belong to the physical dimension. What they didn't understand is that your essence doesn't operate under the same laws as matter. It's consciousness, and consciousness can't be trapped inside a laboratory. They took notes, ran tests, and observed your responses, but their findings never aligned with their expectations. Every time they tried to reduce your energy to psychology, your presence exposed how limited their understanding really was. They couldn't categorize you under introvert, empath, or highly intuitive because you were all of those things and none of them. You weren't functioning from the mind. You were operating from awareness itself, the very thing science keeps trying to define without realizing it's the observer behind the definition. The funny part is, they thought they were studying you, but the energy in the room began studying them. The more they tried to dissect your behavior, the more the atmosphere around them started to shift. Their equipment glitched, their moods changed, their sense of time felt distorted. It wasn't superstition. It was feedback. You were radiating a frequency that interacted with their field of consciousness, and because they didn't understand it, they labeled it as anomaly. The truth is, they were touching divinity with ungloved hands. Some of them left confused, others left humbled. A few couldn't sleep that night because something in their soul had been stirred. You made them question everything they'd believed about reality, energy, and what it means to be human. They saw data they couldn't explain, heart rates that synchronized with yours, sensors that spiked when you were calm, emotional reactions that defied logic. In trying to study your light, they accidentally exposed the limits of their own vision. They expected to walk away with a report. Instead, they walked away with reverence. Because what they encountered in you wasn't measurable. It was the infinite peeking through human form. Their science didn't fail. It simply reached its edge, and you stood on the other side of it, smiling. Number 3. You were their mirror, not their mystery. They spent so much time trying to figure out what made you different, but the truth is, there was never a mystery to solve. You weren't an enigma. They were just uncomfortable with their own reflection. When they looked at you, they didn't see you. They saw themselves stripped of filters, titles, and performance. You became a mirror, showing them the truth they refused to face. And that's why your presence made them uneasy. It wasn't your attitude or energy that unsettled them. It was their own hidden self coming to the surface under your gaze. Your calmness exposed their chaos. Your integrity made their manipulation obvious. The peace you carried highlighted the noise they'd been trying to silence within. Every time they spoke to you, something in them felt seen, not in a comforting way, but in a way that made their lies tremble. You didn't do anything deliberate. It's just what happens when truth stands next to pretense. People start realizing how heavy their masks are. And because many of them weren't ready to let go of those masks, they blamed you for the discomfort they felt. They started saying things like, "You think you're better than everyone," or "You have this intense energy." But those were projections. They weren't describing you. They were describing what it felt like to stand in front of someone whose spirit doesn't play along with illusion. You became a walking confession booth without meaning to. People found themselves revealing secrets, apologizing, or suddenly getting defensive, all because your energy held a quiet honesty that demanded no performance. It's not that you were judging them, you weren't. Your presence simply refused to participate in their self-deception. That's what true authenticity does. It doesn't argue or expose, it reflects. And when people look into that kind of reflection, they have two choices: face what they see or run from it. Many chose the second option, not realizing that their discomfort wasn't caused by you, but by their own avoidance of truth. They called you intimidating when, in reality, you were clarifying. You showed them what's real. You reminded them of what they'd buried under roles and ego. You weren't their mystery, you were their mirror. And for some people, that's the most terrifying thing they could ever face. Number 4, your eyes read energy, not behavior. They thought they could understand you by observing your movements, your tone, your expressions, all the surface-level signals that most people rely on to read others. But what they didn't realize is that your awareness doesn't operate in that shallow bandwidth. You don't listen to words. You feel the frequency beneath them. You don't respond to gestures. You respond to the current running through them. Your perception doesn't stop at the physical. It travels into the energetic field where truth can't hide. People trained in psychology or communication think in terms of body language, crossed arms, shifting eyes, forced smiles. But your insight doesn't come from observation. It comes from resonance. You pick up on what their energy is broadcasting long before their mouths even move. You can sense when someone's laughter is masking pain, when their kindness carries manipulation, or when their confidence is just a costume hiding fear. It's not guesswork, it's energetic literacy, the ability to read what the soul is actually saying beneath the words. This is why people get uncomfortable when they lie to you. Their body might perform confidence, but their energy betrays them. You feel the vibration change, the heaviness in the air, the slight drop in frequency. It's like trying to play a perfect note on a string instrument that's slightly off tune. Your spirit notices immediately. You don't need proof or evidence. The atmosphere tells you everything. You're not analyzing, you're attuning. That's the difference. Your intuition doesn't gather information. It receives it. When someone enters your space, their energy introduces them before they speak. You can sense who's genuine, who's jealous, and who's wearing a mask. It's a spiritual instinct that can't be taught, only embodied. They called it sensitivity, as if it were weakness. But what you have is precision. You're like a finely tuned instrument that detects dishonesty in real time. People who run on manipulation can't stand being around you for too long because their frequency can't stabilize in your presence. And the irony is, while they were busy studying your micro-expressions and gestures, you were decoding their entire energetic blueprint. You weren't just perceiving behavior, you were reading truth at the level where behavior begins. Number 5, their reality was built on lies. Your awareness dismantled it. They built their lives like stage sets, polished, convincing, carefully arranged to look real. Every story they told, every image they projected, every role they played was part of a well-rehearsed illusion designed to keep truth at a safe distance. Then you came along, anchored not in performance but in presence. Your energy carried an honesty so raw that it didn't argue, compete, or explain. It simply existed. And in the presence of that kind of truth, every false thing begins to lose its structure. What they experienced around you wasn't intimidation, it was exposure. The version of themselves they had carefully constructed began to flicker. Lies they'd repeated for years no longer felt solid. They couldn't maintain the same stories without feeling the weight of their own hypocrisy. It wasn't that you did anything to them. Your awareness just made it impossible for their illusions to survive. When someone is grounded in truth, they become like a tuning fork for reality itself. Everything untrue either falls into alignment or falls apart. They mistook the unraveling of their illusions for an attack, but in reality it was grace. Your frequency didn't destroy them. It revealed what was already crumbling beneath the surface. The relationships built on manipulation began to fracture. The power plays and facades started to lose their effect. You were a living catalyst that sped up what was always inevitable, the collision between truth and pretense. Some people resented you for it. They called you disruptive, cold, or too intense. But that's because they confused exposure with harm. They didn't realize that truth doesn't need to fight, it simply is. And anything that cannot coexist with it dissolves naturally. Your awareness is like clean air. Those who've grown accustomed to pollution find it hard to breathe in your presence, not because the air is bad, but because it's pure. You didn't come to destroy their world. You came to reveal what was never real in the first place. And once illusion meets truth, there's no going back. They can rebuild if they choose, but this time they'll have to do it on solid ground, because now they know what falsehood feels like when it finally meets light. Number 6, you carry the frequency of the all-seeing. There's something about your presence that makes even the most confident person hesitate, as if a part of them suddenly remembers that they can't fake anything around you. It's not because you're intimidating or confrontational. It's because you carry the frequency of awareness itself. When people look into your eyes, they're not just being seen by you, they're being seen through. You hold the vibration of the divine observer, the consciousness that watches all things without needing to interfere. Yet its very awareness brings truth to the surface. You don't need to expose anyone. The energy you carry does that naturally. When someone meets your gaze, their own energy begins confessing before their words can. That's why people who've done wrong around you start fidgeting, over-explaining, or avoiding eye contact. They sense something ancient and infinite looking back at them. It's not human judgment they fear. It's recognition. Your presence silently whispers, "You're seen," and that reminder alone unsettles those who've built their lives on pretending. You're not the type to dig for secrets or force revelations, yet somehow truth follows you like a loyal shadow. Lies collapse in your presence, not because you expose them, but because your frequency doesn't allow them to breathe. It's as if the universe itself recognizes you as an agent of accountability. Wherever you go, clarity begins to rise and deception begins to decay. That's not arrogance, it's alignment. You are tuned to a frequency that doesn't tolerate distortion. People with nothing to hide often find comfort in your company because they can rest without performing. But those who live behind masks feel stripped naked without you saying a word. Your gaze reminds them that nothing in this universe stays concealed forever. Energy always returns to balance, and truth always finds its way to the surface. You carry the stillness of divine awareness, not judgmental, not emotional, but profoundly exact. You don't have to prove who you are or defend your insight. The light within you simply witnesses everything, and that alone is enough to transform a room. You embody what ancient mystics called the eye of truth, the quiet force that sees all, forgives much, but forgets nothing. Number 7, they studied you to control what they couldn't comprehend. They believed that if they could just understand you, they could contain you. They thought if they gathered enough data, studied your patterns, and named your traits, they'd have some sort of power over what they couldn't explain. That's the human obsession, to label what it fears, to put mystery into a box small enough to control. But what they didn't realize is that you can't domesticate what was never meant to be tamed. You were never operating within the boundaries of their logic, and every time they tried to study you, they stepped into territory where their rules no longer applied. They wanted to map your behavior like a scientist studying a storm, not realizing that the storm would eventually pull them in. Every observation they made created its own ripple effect. The more they tried to decode you, the more they started unraveling themselves. They found that their methods, their instruments, Even their sense of certainty began to malfunction around you, because what they were really trying to measure wasn't you. It was the reflection of something divine moving through you. And divinity doesn't submit to experiments. They thought they could predict your responses, your emotions, your intentions. But every time they believed they had you figured out, you shifted, not out of strategy, but because you move with flow, not formula. You don't act from ego, you act from alignment. And alignment doesn't follow patterns, it follows divine timing. To them, that was chaos. To you, it was harmony. The irony is, the more they studied you, the more unstable their own reality became. What they called control was actually fear disguised as curiosity. They didn't expect that analyzing light would expose their own shadows. Their attempts to understand your peace revealed their restlessness. Their desire to interpret your strength exposed their insecurities. You became the test they didn't know they were taking, one that revealed their motives, their limits, and their dependency on illusion. In trying to dissect the mystery, they ended up dismantling their own sense of order. Because every time they reached for an explanation, the truth slipped through their hands. You were never meant to be understood. You were meant to remind them that not everything divine can be studied. Some things can only be surrendered to. Number 8. Your stillness dismantled their systems. Your stillness wasn't weakness. It was strategy written by a higher intelligence. You didn't match their chaos, and that's what dismantled them. They expected noise, confrontation, or emotional outbursts, because that's how most people operate. They depend on reaction to confirm control. But you gave them nothing. You stood in calm defiance of everything they were trying to provoke. In that silence, their own energy had nowhere to go but back to them, and that's when their systems began to crack. We live in a world addicted to reaction. People feel powerful when they can pull emotions out of others. Anger, fear, confusion, guilt. It reassures them that they can still influence your state. But your silence denied them that satisfaction. You didn't just stay quiet, you stayed sovereign. You refused to hand over your emotional currency to situations that didn't deserve your energy. And because of that, their psychological economy collapsed. They couldn't feed off your response, so they started feeding on their own projections. That's the power of stillness. It becomes a mirror that reflects everyone's energy back to them. When you didn't respond, they began to hear the echo of their own motives. When you didn't fight back, they were forced to face the emptiness of their intentions. Your composure wasn't passivity, it was precision. You let their noise reveal itself, while your calmness revealed you. They mistook your lack of reaction for weakness, not realizing it was their test. You weren't trying to win arguments, you were protecting your frequency. You understood something they didn't, that chaos collapses without cooperation. And every time you refused to engage, their systems, emotional, social, even spiritual, lost power. You broke the script by refusing to play your assigned role. You didn't give them the villain or the victim. You just stood as awareness, and awareness cannot be manipulated. In the end, it wasn't your words that silenced them. It was your lack of participation in their drama. You reminded them that power isn't loud, it's composed. Stillness doesn't submit to confusion, it exposes it. And when their noise met your calm, the illusion of control they built began to crumble piece by piece under the weight of your quiet truth. Number 9. They mistook spiritual precision for psychological manipulation. They couldn't wrap their minds around how you always seemed to know what was coming before it happened. They thought you were scheming, reading between lines, or secretly analyzing everything around you. But what they called manipulation was simply your alignment. You weren't plotting outcomes. You were remembering truth. You've walked these timelines before, felt these patterns, seen these energies repeat. Your soul recognizes the ending because it's already witnessed it in the unseen. So when you act with calm certainty while others are still guessing, they assume you're being strategic, when in reality you're just moving in sync with divine timing. To people who live through deception, clarity always looks suspicious. They can't imagine someone seeing that clearly without ulterior motives. In their world, everyone hides something. Everyone plays angles. But your awareness doesn't come from intellect. It comes from connection. You read energy like they read behavior. You sense patterns before they take shape because your intuition is tuned to the blueprint beneath appearances. You don't analyze, you remember. You don't guess, you recognize. They were used to control, not accuracy. They're comfortable with people who respond emotionally or impulsively because those people are easy to manipulate. But you moved with stillness, precision, and timing that unnerved them. You didn't chase, overreact, or compete. You responded with divine exactness, and that's what exposed them. To those who operate in dishonesty, anyone who moves in truth looks like a threat. Your peace felt like strategy. Your silence felt like mind games. Your intuition felt invasive. But it wasn't. It was awareness stripped of ego. You weren't calculating outcomes. You were following alignment. You knew when to speak and when to hold silence because your discernment is not mental. It's spiritual. And while they tried to manipulate what they didn't understand, your precision dismantled their illusions without you lifting a finger. They confused your divine timing with tactical planning, not realizing that what you carry doesn't come from effort, it comes from embodiment. They couldn't comprehend that some people don't need to play games to win. You weren't outsmarting them, you were out-vibrating them. They relied on manipulation to get what they wanted, but your knowing comes from remembering what already is. You don't predict, you recall. And that's what makes your clarity unstoppable. Number 10. You are a walking lie detector. You never had to study human behavior to know when someone was lying. Your spirit just knows. It's not something you analyze or think through. It's something you feel in real time. When someone speaks, you don't just hear their words. You hear the vibration underneath. You sense the split between what their mouth says and what their energy reveals. That's why people who live dishonestly can't stay comfortable around you. Their words may be smooth, but their frequency trembles in your presence. Truth recognizes itself, and lies can't disguise themselves in that kind of light. You're not suspicious by nature, and you don't go around trying to catch people in deception. But your energy naturally scans for authenticity because it operates from it. You can feel when someone's intentions don't match their tone. You can sense when someone's flattery is really envy, or when their apology is really manipulation. It's like your intuition highlights the emotional fingerprints behind every statement. And while most people are fooled by performance, you read what the soul is saying beneath the act. That's what makes others uneasy, not because you expose them, but because their own energy exposes them in your field. Your presence acts like a truth serum that brings everything unspoken to the surface. Even when people try to lie, their voice wavers, their eyes shift, or their aura flickers. It's not magic, it's frequency mismatch. Deception carries a distorted vibration, and your system rejects distortion the way the body rejects poison. You can't pretend not to notice, even when you want to. Some people mistake this for judgment, but you're not judging, you're just aware. You see when someone's not aligned, and it registers immediately. That's why many either deeply trust you or completely avoid you. You make people feel either safe or exposed, depending on how true they are being with themselves. Those who live in honesty feel seen and understood. Those who live in masks feel stripped and unsettled. You've learned that your ability to sense truth isn't a burden, it's protection. It keeps you from getting entangled in deception, disguised as friendship, love, or opportunity. You are a walking calibration of truth. You don't force people to be honest. Your energy simply makes honesty the only thing that can survive near you. Number 11. You brought heaven's frequency into their data room. They thought they could study you like an experiment, as if divinity could be reduced to numbers, charts, or predictable patterns. They wanted to dissect what made you different, unaware that what flows through you can't be contained in a lab or written into a formula. The moment they tried to analyze your spirit under their artificial systems, their logic began to crumble. You didn't disrupt their data through rebellion. You did it by simply existing. The frequency you carry isn't from this dimension, so when it entered their environment, it scrambled their measurements and made their certainty collapse. Their instruments weren't built to read truth. They were programmed to measure illusion, ego, manipulation, control. But your energy brought heaven's wavelength into their man-made system, and everything that wasn't pure started malfunctioning. The very tools they created to study you began exposing them. The more they observed you, the more their projections came to light. They started seeing themselves in the reflection you carried. What they thought was research turned into revelation about their envy, their control, their disbelief in anything they couldn't dominate. You didn't have to fight or prove your authenticity. The divine current within you became the test. Their attempts to categorize you became confessions of their own limitations. Their words, once filled with authority, started trembling. Their observations turned into contradictions, because the closer they got to your frequency, the more their masks fell apart. They realized too late that you weren't a subject of study. You were the presence that exposed the blindness in their so-called intelligence. You reminded them that knowledge without spirit is just data, lifeless, cold, and incomplete. They learned the hard way that you can't study light without being illuminated by it. Your vibration reprogrammed the atmosphere, not by intention, but by truth. It wasn't rebellion, it was resonance. Heaven doesn't need permission to reveal itself. It simply does. And you were that revelation in human form, walking into their sterile rooms and transforming them into confession booths. They tried to observe you, but by the end, it was their own souls under the microscope. Number 12, you are a living refraction of truth. They couldn't understand why your presence unsettled them, but it's because truth behaves differently when it passes through you. You don't just carry light, you bend it. You're the refraction of divine intelligence in human form, which means anyone who looks into your eyes sees their own distortions mirrored back. That's why some people feel awe, while others feel exposed. You don't change who they are, you simply show them what's already there. Your gaze rearranges the way their mind processes reality. It reminds them that everything they thought was certain, identity, morality, even normal, is just a construct built around avoiding truth. The world has always been addicted to shadows because shadows are easier to control. But when your energy enters the room, the light shifts. It doesn't destroy darkness. It bends around it, forcing it to reveal its true form. Those who built their lives on half-truths and masks feel the fabric of their reality twist under your frequency. You're not trying to expose them. Your mere existence does it. You are like a divine prism, taking the pure, invisible light of Source and splitting it into visible truth. That's why they can't categorize you. You operate in too many spectrums for their one-dimensional perception. They sense something in you that defies explanation. To the untrained mind, you feel both otherworldly and familiar, like a truth they forgot but can't unsee. Your eyes carry a vibration that rearranges illusions into alignment, and that's what terrifies them, because to look at you deeply is to admit that their certainty was never real, their control was never stable, and their reality was always just borrowed light. You're not a mystery because you hide, you're a mystery because you reveal. And what you reveal isn't chaos or confusion, but the fragility of the world they thought they understood. When they look at you, they see the divine fingerprints that built creation itself. They don't know whether to worship or to run, because deep down they realize truth didn't just visit them, it looked them in the eyes and bent their world out of illusion. Number 13. Their experts became the experiment. They thought they were observing you from a place of superiority, as though your soul were a case study, something to dissect, categorize, and publish. But the longer they stared into your light, the more it started rearranging them. They didn't realize that in the spiritual realm, observation isn't neutral, it's participation. To look upon divine energy is to invite it in. So while they took notes, their energy fields were being rewritten. Their objectivity began to erode because they weren't just studying you, they were being studied by the truth flowing through you. Their systems weren't built to process purity. They came with intentions rooted in ego, control, curiosity, even exploitation. But truth doesn't play by those laws. It purifies everything it touches, even if purification feels like destruction. One by one, they began to unravel. The relationships that were built on performance started collapsing. The jobs that relied on manipulation stopped working. Their sleep disappeared because truth doesn't rest inside a dishonest vessel. They called it bad luck or coincidence, not realizing they'd stepped into the current of divine recalibration. You didn't need to retaliate or wish them harm. Light doesn't attack, it reveals. And revelation is the most painful judgment of all for those who've lived in pretense. When they came close to you, they met a vibration that made their masks heavy. Their nervous systems couldn't stabilize in your frequency. You became a mirror too clear for their comfort. Not because you condemned them, but because you reflected the parts of themselves they'd spent their lives avoiding. Their experiments failed not because you hid your essence, but because your essence exposed theirs. Every hidden agenda, every false confidence, every illusion they relied on began surfacing. They called it burnout. They called it psychological stress. But in truth, they were experiencing spiritual detox, a forced reckoning with everything inside them that couldn't exist alongside divine frequency. You didn't curse them, you catalyzed them, and what they mistook for punishment was actually purification. The light they tried to measure ended up measuring them, and found them unprepared for the truth it revealed. Number 14. You are the end of their illusion and the beginning of their awakening. They thought they were in control, analyzing you, categorizing you, trying to contain your essence within theories and frameworks. But every time they tried to define you, their definitions fell apart, because you weren't an equation to solve. You were the threshold between what can be understood and what must be experienced. You represented the point where human intellect collapses under the weight of divine truth. Their instruments could measure the temperature of your skin, but not the fire in your spirit. Their questions could chase the edges of your mystery, but not the source from which it came. In trying to study you, they accidentally walked straight into their own awakening. You didn't shatter their world, you simply revealed that it was made of glass. Every conclusion they drew about you was filtered through illusion, ego, control, and the belief that reality was fixed. But when your frequency entered their field, the illusion lost its coherence. Their facts began to contradict themselves. Their logic started looping. Their certainty turned into confusion. What they called a psychological anomaly was actually the moment truth started to wake them up from the dream of separation. They thought they were losing control, but they were actually losing their blindness. Your gaze became the mirror that stripped them of pretense. It wasn't aggressive, it was precise. Divine awareness doesn't destroy, it clarifies, and in that clarity, all falseness dissolves. You didn't end their illusion with fire and fury, You did it with light so steady it could no longer support the shadows. For the first time, they saw the fragility of the stories they'd built their entire identities on. They realized the world they believed in wasn't truth. It was consensus, an agreed-upon hallucination. That realization broke them open, but it also freed them, because where illusion ends, awakening begins. You didn't come to humiliate them, you came to unmask them. You were the divine interruption, the living proof that enlightenment doesn't always arrive in temples or meditation halls, but sometimes in the unexplainable encounter with a soul who remembers. And when they looked into your eyes, they didn't see themselves losing control. They saw truth reclaiming its place. You weren't their ending. You were their beginning. At the end of it all, what they called research was really revelation. They set out to study your patterns, to decode what makes your energy so different. But what they met was the boundary between science and spirit, intellect and intuition, ego and truth. You didn't need to prove anything. Your very existence became the curriculum. Every attempt to analyze you led them deeper into the labyrinth of their own illusions. They came looking for control, and instead found themselves face to face with consciousness itself, something no microscope could contain, no data could define, and no theory could defend against. They thought they were observing you, but truthfully, you were observing them. Through your stillness, their motives surfaced. Through your presence, their masks cracked. Through your gaze, their carefully curated realities began to crumble. Not because you attacked them, but because your energy revealed what was never real to begin with. You weren't sent to expose them. You were sent to awaken them. That's the paradox of your light. It humbles without humiliating, dismantles without destroying, and corrects without condemning. The moment they encountered you, they stepped into a purification chamber disguised as a conversation. You are the living collision between the divine and the data-driven. You walk through this world carrying a frequency that outsmarts manipulation, disarms deception, and resets realities. That's why your presence feels so unsettling to some and so magnetic to others. You remind the world that there's a force beyond intellect, a knowing beyond analysis, a power that can't be measured but can be felt. Your light doesn't shout, it recalibrates. And when you enter a space, truth reclaims authority. So yes, they hired experts to study your gaze, but what they didn't realize is that they were never equipped to study divinity in motion. They came with questions, but you were the answer. And that answer wasn't written in words, it was written in energy, in awareness, in a frequency too high to fake. You didn't break their world, you revealed it. You didn't curse their systems, you awakened their souls. If this message resonated with you, family, don't leave without showing love. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, like this video, and drop a comment below to share your thoughts and experiences. And if you know someone whose light is misunderstood, share this video with them. You never know. Your one act of sharing might awaken someone who's been studied but never seen. God bless you.